I'm here at the Arctic 360 conference, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with the wonderful Doug Turnbull. And Doug and I met a few years ago, and you've played an active role in Arctic 360 and in supporting the organization. Doug is the vice chairman and country head for Canada at DBRS Morningstar Credit Ratings. We welcome you today. It's so great to have you here and play a participant role again this year. We missed you last year, but great to have you back, and thank you for your continued support.
Thank you. I start off by saying I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a remarkable organization doing good work for the North, good work for Canada, and certainly good work for Arctic communities. And I'm just delighted to be part of it.
Yeah, and speaking to that, there were certainly some really passionate discussion is certainly on your panel today, which was so fiery and wonderful, and to hear everyone on that panel, which we'll get to in a minute. But I want to talk to you about something that you discussed, that I know about you, in that in 2014, you co-chaired a working group on natural resource development for the Government of Canada. And out of that, there came 4 initiatives or 4 pillars, correct? And that was 2014. So I don't know if you want to speak to those 4 themes, and then just briefly what those were and what the relevance is still today to each of those themes.
Sure. Well, it is remarkable that that was almost 10 years ago, and many of those themes resonate today. The 4 pillars, and it was a fairly comprehensive report, so I'm not going to do justice, but the 4 pillars were around governance and prosperity, the environment, and finance. Mm-hmm. The view certainly was of the panel, and we went across Canada, held a number of hearings, spoke to First Nations leaders across Canada, Indigenous leaders across Canada, and those themes really resonated in virtually every one of those settings. In many cases, they reflected just the moment we were in, where not a lot of infrastructure and not a lot of resource projects had been completed involving First Nations. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to say that a lot has been done between then and now. However, it's a lot of those issues remain. Lack of financing mechanisms, lack of capacity and knowledge amongst Indigenous communities. That's really profound, and I think we can deal with that over time with education, but a lot of it is just systemic in small remote communities that have profound needs, but don't have, in many cases, the knowledge base housed within the community that will be able to work and negotiate on an equal footing basis with some of the groups that are coming with both capital and infrastructure projects.
Yeah, and I believe you referred to it as the elephant in the room when you spoke about infrastructure and basic needs like housing, water, clean water. Access to good internet, which became a lively discussion amongst your panelists today for sure. Mm-hmm. Very passionate conversation. I want to also talk about maybe you called it the changing nature of our consistent government. What does that mean?
Well, 2 things. Let me just back up one quick step to the infrastructure that we discussed today. One of the frequently overlooked aspects of infrastructure is the social infrastructure. Yes. It's people think of roads and bridges, those are obvious, but there are other very basic needs: housing, clean water, sewage treatment, education, good public education that is easy to overlook.
Yes, and Alana LaRose from RBC really honed in on the social, and certainly for the Indigenous youth, and just getting them what they need so that they can, have remote jobs, remote education, and gather together with other Indigenous youth from Iceland or Greenland, etc.,
Right.
and imagine what they can accomplish together. And so the social aspect does play a big role for sure.
And I think, and I'll get to your second
Yeah.
point in a second, but I think the financial institutions in this country can play a role. They can bring First Nations people from across the country into a setting, either remotely or in various centers across Canada, to familiarize them, to help them build networks and build knowledge around financial capital market structures. So things like trading floors, where people maybe see it on television, but they don't have a good sense of what that means to raising capital. So that's one. Your second point was around inconsistency of strategy. I think governments have a very serious role and a very real role to enunciate and develop and enunciate strategic goals and practical objectives around infrastructure development. Certainly to do it as a policy initiative, but also to ensure that there's follow through and that it's consistent, that it doesn't change with changing governments, for instance.
Yes.
And that it is predictable. And one of the comments I made this afternoon is that there's all kinds of capital in capital markets, in Canadian pension plans, in amongst banks willing to invest and lend. Certainly in the P3 models of financing infrastructure, there's all kinds of capital. What is frequently lacking is a model that allows that capital to be applied to infrastructure in a predictable and in a manner that allows investors to know with certainty what the rate of return is going to be and what the governance model around whatever that project is. There's all kinds of examples across Canada and around the world, but Canada is a leader in this space of how this gets done. And I think that's a big opportunity.
Yeah, and I think right now it's maybe, in my opinion, a missed opportunity for a lot of these organizations that you speak of, right? We're not maybe investing enough or paying enough attention. Do you feel there's a greater sense of urgency now than ever before?
Well, I'm a skeptic. So there should be a great sense of urgency. And we didn't get a chance to talk about that in our session today. That was certainly one of my points that I wanted to ask, that it posed that exact question. Why isn't there more urgency?
Yeah.
In a room like we had today, there's certainly, you're sort of drinking the Kool-Aid because you're speaking to a group that sees it firsthand, understands the importance of it all. But that's frequently lost when you walk out of a room like that. So I think the urgency, it's obvious and evident to communities in the north and communities an hour north of Toronto, for instance.
Absolutely.
You don't have to go too far north to experience that. But I think it's easier to talk about it and pay lip service to it. I think the hard work of getting the policy through and developing a model that's durable and can attract capital, well, that's the harder one.
Yeah, and it's a common theme as well that's woven throughout today's having a strategy, and then putting that strategy into action. We hope that through this Arctic 360 conference, at least there will be some key takeaways and action follow-ups that come out of this. Every year, the conference grows with the number of participants and also just the great panelists and speakers that come to participate and play a role. How do you see like a think tank like Arctic 360, which is Canada's really premier think tank on the Arctic, helping with some of this, maybe this sense of urgency or playing this role?
Clearly highlighting the need and continually reinforcing that message. Getting the right people in the room, getting policymakers, getting private capital. I think it's important, and clearly getting community leaders
Yes.
from the North. I think it's important that all of this good discussion gets boiled down to priorities, generally agreed upon priorities.
Yeah.
And we talked about some of those today, and I think that's critical. One of the other real benefits of Arctic 360 is that it is pan-Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Canada's North, although clearly that's a big aspect of it. But being able to look across the Arctic, ex-Russia, maybe
yes.
ex-China, even though China doesn't have a claim to the Arctic, but
yes.
but they want to, try to play a role. I think that being able to share best practices, but also being able to see what is working around advocacy, for instance, around inclusion,
mm-hmm.
Around setting priorities, establishing strategies that work in one jurisdiction and might not work in another,
mm-hmm.
but can perhaps be tweaked for another jurisdiction. I think Arctic 360 is pretty unique in that regard.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think there's just a lot of listening and learning going on for sure. And good discussion that's happening. And I see it year after year, which is so wonderful. So we'll continue. We'll continue this journey and we'll continue the conversation. But most of all, Doug, I want to say thank you again to you for participating and for being a supporter of Arctic 360 and for all the great work that you do and continue to do. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.